Right. So it just makes me laugh, actually. We've got this final day and we've got Shinran being outrageous and challenging and turning things on its head again, even on the last day. Yeah, so what we're going to be looking at today is irreversibility towards enlightenment, and also how we can live the Nembutsu, how we can take this practice and weave it into our lives. I should say this orientation, really. Anyway. So because of this, we have Maitreya back on the shrine again, although we still have all the broken things around his feet. And we have Maitreya back on the shrine because as well as embodying Maha Maitri, or love imbued with wisdom, he is also the Buddha of the future, and this means he is the Buddha of our potential for enlightenment. So let's salute the three jewels in the person of Amida Buddha and Maitreya in unison. Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Namah. Om Ha Hum. So today's verses of the Tanisho. Tanisho 9. Although I say the Nembutsu, I rarely experience joyful happiness, nor do I have the desire to immediately go to the Pure Land. What should be done about this? I asked. Then he responded, I, Shinran, have been having the same question also, and now you, Wien, have the same thought. When I carefully consider the matter, my birth in the Pure Land is settled without doubt, for the very reason that I do not rejoice about that which I should be bursting with joy. It is the working of blind passion, which suppresses the heart that would rejoice and prevents its fullest expression. All this the Buddha already knew and called us foolish beings filled with blind passion. Thus, when we realize that the compassionate vow of other power is for beings like ourselves, the vow becomes even more reliable and dependable. The working of blind passion also causes us not to want to go to the Pure Land and makes us feel uneasy, worrying about death when we become even slightly ill. Impossible, it seems, to leave this old house of agitation, where we have wandered aimlessly since the beginning of time. Nor can we long for the pure land of peace, which we have yet to know. This is due to blind passion, so truly powerful and overwhelming. But no matter how reluctant we may be, when our life in this world comes to an end, beyond our control, then for the first time we go to the land of fulfillment. Those who do not want to go immediately are the special concern of true compassion. For this very reason, the vow of true compassion is completely dependable, and our birth in the Pure Land is absolutely certain. If our hearts were filled with joyful happiness, and we desired to go swiftly to the Pure Land, we might be misled to think that perhaps we are free of blind passion. From Tanisho 14. In the awakening of one thought moment, having been illuminated by Amida's light, we are endowed with true entrusting, which is firm as a diamond. Thus, we are already included in the stage of the truly settled. When our life comes to an end, all the blind passions and evil hindrances are immediately transformed into the realization of the wisdom of non-origination. From Tanisho 16. In the person of single-hearted Nembutsu, the turning of mind occurs only once. The turning of mind refers to this: transformation of those ignorant of the primal vow of other power, who, being granted Amida's wisdom, and realizing the impossibility of everyday mind attaining birth, abandon the old mind and entrust the self to the primal vow. If it is necessary to undergo the turning of mind day and night about every deed in order to attain birth, we may die before doing so, or before nurturing tenderness and forbearance. Since our lives may come to an end between the inhaling and exhaling of breath, then the primal vow, which grasps us never to abandon us, would have no meaning. In all matters regarding birth, it is not necessary to contrive or design, but always remember and become absorbed in the deep and profound compassion of Amida. Then we shall be able to say the Nembutsu spontaneously, made to become so by itself. When I do not contrive or calculate, I am made to become so by itself. This is none other than the working of other power. And yet, to my regret, I hear some people talking knowingly about being made to become so by itself, as if it were something special. How deplorable this is. I love it. Ah, my tree, my tree, swaha. 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 Ah, my tree. So, endowed with true entrusting, which is as firm as a diamond. I actually had a title for this talk, which was Faith as Experience and Non-Experience. Yeah. And I think what I love, particularly about that Tanisho 9, when Wien is saying, but my heart isn't filled with desire to go to the Pure Land. He's saying, but I'm not the ideal Buddhist practitioner. And Shinran says, well, no, of course you're not. And he just says, well, and in a way it's like, well, if we were Buddhas already, what point would, we wouldn't be needing to tune in to the Adhisthana to benefit from the primal vow of Amida. And I just love this bit about when we realise that the compassionate vow of other power is for beings like ourselves, the vow becomes even more reliable and dependable. So it's like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, it's not like they're interested in like some sort of ideal spiritual practitioner who lives a long, long away, far, far away, possibly in Tibet on the side of a mountain. But, it's not going to be us in our lives, in our houses, with our stuff going on, whatever that might be. Oh, no, it'll be for somebody else who's way more spiritual than me. And Shinran is just saying, when we realise that the compassionate vow of other power is for beings like ourselves, this vow becomes even more reliable and dependable. The Dharma is for us, it's not for somebody else. And the bit before it, when he says, all this the Buddha already knew and called us foolish beings filled with blind passion. It's like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, they know we're not enlightened. Like they're not expecting us to be enlightened. How could they have the joy and pleasure of playing in the garden of birth and death and the forest of the passions if they weren't rescuing such foolish beings as ourselves? Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. So just to say, like the first part of the talk is going to be about this idea, well, what if we did just entrust, like say we simply entrusted that the compassionate vow of Amida meant that we were irreversibly bound for enlightenment. Okay, like how would that feel? I must say, don't try going to your centre and just saying that straight, because people will look at you really funny. Anyhow, that's the first part of the talk. And the second part of the talk will be, this living the Nembutsu. How do we put this into practice in our lives? Okay, so what we're going to use this little paragraph from 14 to unpack what Shinran's actually saying. So that goes, in the awakening of one thought moment, having been illuminated by Amida's light. So in the awakening of one thought moment, it's like faith experience, it's instantaneous. It's like it happens like now. One moment, it's not there. We're just in ordinary mind. And then it is there and it's like, oh. And it's described as awakening, as seeing clearly. And this is where we go back to faith as insight. Okay. And then having been illuminated by Amida's light. So that awakening in that one thought moment, in Shinran's map of awakening, that is not our efforts. That is us receiving Amida's mind. That is us receiving as a free gift the influence of wisdom and compassion. So having been illuminated by Amida's light, we are endowed with true entrusting, which is firm as a diamond. Thus, we are already included in the stage of the truly settled. So we are endowed with true entrusting. It's like Amida is giving us the three minds of faith: the seeing clearly, the first mind of faith, the joyful heart, which kind of like recognizes the influence of awakening and just kind of goes, yay. And the third mind of faith, which is desire for awakening, both for ourselves and for others. And that's given us by Amida. And it's just this one thought moment. And then it is as firm as a diamond, and we are already included in the stage of the truly settled. So what Shinran is saying is he is equating the experience of true entrusting granted us by Amida. It's not our entrusting, it is a gift given to us. He is equating that, well, in fact, not even just with stream entry, but with non-returning. He's basically saying, well, this would be your last life. Now, we're going to unpack that a little more and relate it to the rest of the tradition in a minute, but I'm just going to carry on explaining what Shinran's map is, okay, so you know what it is. And then he says, when our life comes to an end, all the blind passions and evil hindrances are immediately transformed into the realization of the wisdom of non-origination. So with Shinran's map of how awakening happens, we don't become enlightened now, and we're not even trying to become enlightened now. So can you see how this relates to this totally dropping any agenda? We're letting go of looking for an outcome now. Like, if I do this, I'm going to become this person that's experiencing insight now. He's saying, just drop it. It isn't going to happen in this life. It's not going to happen. This everyday mind isn't going to get enlightened. And what he's meaning by that is the small self that sees in terms of me and other, that self won't get enlightened. It's like something drops away and we see that that perspective was a mistake. Okay. So the wisdom of non-origination, that's talking about a direct understanding of insubstantiality. He's talking about seeing shunyata, seeing everything as a flow of conditions. It's non-origination, because if you don't have fixed things that come into being and end, and you just have a flow, well, in a way, how do you have a start point for anything? How do you have a start point for a tree or a chair or a person? It's like there's just a flow of conditions that become tree, chair, person, and then they flow on. Yeah, so here he's talking about being illuminated by Amida's light. And sometimes he says, Amida's mind endowed to me, being grasped, never to be abandoned. And sometimes he talks about this moment of true entrusting as the turning of mind. But his point is, it happens just once. And once that true entrusting has arisen within us, we can never go back. Actually, it's like we've been, well, it says it all. We've been grasped, never to be abandoned. Once we have been grasped by Amida's compassion, actually, Amida isn't going to let us go again. it's not to do with us, it's to do with Amida. I mean, Amida's been practicing for 5 kalpas for this point. He's not going to let go that easily. So this is different to Pure Land tradition before Shinran. So before this point, in Pure Land practice, the idea was that every time that an unskillful thought arose, or every time, just in your ordinary life, you're to say the Nembutsu. So you're to do the turning of mind again and again and again. And the point of death becomes very important in this because, you need to be saying the Nembutsu and turning towards Amida at the point of death to be able to go to the Pure Land. Now, I can imagine this might create a certain amount of anxiety and tension because you can't really choose how you're going to die. So, as Shinran says, if it is necessary to undergo the turning of mind day and night about every deed in order to attain birth, we may die before doing so, or before nurturing tenderness and forbearance, since our lives may come to an end between the inhaling and exhaling of breath. Then the primal vow which grasps us never to abandon us would have no meaning. So he's sort of saying, well, we might die before we've perfected our metta practice, and then what would happen? So for Shinran, he says, no, actually transformation happens in this life. We don't become enlightened in this life, but we just trust that that's happened and that in our next life we'll go to the Pure Land. Okay, so we're encountering another one of these things where in a traditional society, Pure Land Buddhists would probably just believe this completely literally. And, well, you can decide what perspective you want to take up. But now we're going to unpack, well, how can we approach this? And how does this relate to the rest of the tradition? So all the different presentations of the Buddhist path, certainly that I'm aware of, they all talk about a point in practice where the pull of the unconditioned becomes stronger than the sort of lure of samsara, the desire to stay small, the desire to kind of look for comfort and safety in chocolate and Big Macs and sexual partners and all the rest of it. So for early Buddhism, for the Buddha, he talks about this in terms of stream entry. And I do really love this image, I think probably because it just seems to be so like how it would be. So, if you chuck a stick in a river, and if it's at the edge of the stream, it gets pushed back into the bank, doesn't it? And that's we start practicing, but it's there's so much of us that just want to kind of, we just don't, it's hard work at practicing the Dharma. It's scary. We have to make ourselves vulnerable. Why would you want to do that? Oh no, let's do that. When I first met the Dharma, I spent a number of years where I'd come along to 3 or 4 sessions and then I just vanish for another year and I just go climbing for another year and just go, no, I can't do it. And then something would draw me back and I'd go along for another 3 or 4 sessions and then I'd vanish for another year. Anyway, eventually I managed to stop vanishing and actually kind of commit. But, we do have this draw in us not to practice, not to awaken. But then with this sort of river analogy, say we're paddling our boat out and first of all the current's trying to push us back into the edge of the stream. But at a certain point, it's like we get into the middle of the river and then we are in the flow of this current. And even if we, probably we don't have to sort of row quite so hard. It's more like we just need to steer with our oars and make sure we keep steering ourselves into the center of the current. And that current will take us to the ocean. Yes. So for the Buddha, he talks about stream entry quite frequently in terms of breaking the first 3 of the 10 fetters: fixed self-view, reliance on rites and rituals as ends in themselves, and skeptical doubt. So he talks about them in terms of insight, seeing through. Now, we've been equating faith with insight. So it's like, when Shinran talks about faith or true entrusting, he is talking about insight. And you can see actually that you can revision those 3 fetters in terms of faith. So if we start with number 3, skeptical doubt, well, actually, if you're having a direct experience of Amida and there's just this vastness, actually you're not going to be experiencing skeptical doubt. And if this is where I'm thinking, I need to think this through more, how to explain it conceptually. I mean, actually, this whole thing about rites and rituals as ends in themselves, just go back to how we were talking about ethics and not going for refuge to ethics as an end in itself. Actually, Amida is endowing us with this perspective that what we need is to see through limited selfhood and to see the flow of conditions and not to just think doing the right thing and making me a good person is going to do it. So there's an insight aspect to that where actually we are seeing through the second fetter. We're breaking the second fetter. And if we are experiencing Amida, actually, I mean, the thing is, experience of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is graded. So in the drama of cosmic enlightenment, actually, Bhante talks about how one can experience a Bodhisattva. You know, you can experience transcendental figures as a Devatar form, like just a sort of mundane spirit that's beneficial in our lives, like a sort of guardian angel figure. Or we can experience them as a Bodhisattva, which is more like, you know, a deep and profound practitioner, but not fully enlightened. Or we can experience them as a Buddha, which is, you know, direct, like, you know, they are telling us this is the wisdom of non-origination. So, you know, there's different levels on which we can experience Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and it's like different levels of insight that we're able to be receptive to. But it's like in the nature of experiencing those figures, there has to be a sort of dissolving and a softening of this sense of like self and other. And actually it's like the more that dissolves, the more we're, I don't know quite how to put this. It's like, you could say if we're experiencing those figures in their kind of like full Buddha nature, like there's a point in my sadhana where Maitreya looks at me and I look at Maitreya and I realise that Maitreya sees me as an enlightened being. It's like actually from an enlightened being's point of view, there's no separation between us and absolute wisdom. It's like they're giving us a perspective beyond self and other. So this is seeing the Buddha as breaking the first fetter. Okay. So there is a way of revisioning the first 3 fetters as faith experience just as clearly as insight experience. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. The other way the Buddha talks about stream entry in the Pali Canon is he talks about it as unshakable faith in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And it's amazing how often he describes it in these terms, and yet how rarely it gets unpacked as stream entry, as unshakable faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Okay. Right, okay, so that's the Buddha and early Buddhism, like how he would see irreversibility. And then we get the Mahayana. So we get Bodhisattva Bhumis. So again, you've got such a funny word, isn't it? And you get, that's grounds. It means sort of like, anyway. But again, it's sort of giving stages of the Bodhisattva path. And I won't go through them, but again, there's a particular stage which is the arising of the bodhicitta, which we were exploring yesterday. And that is the point at which the aspiring bodhisattva becomes irreversible. They are destined for Buddhahood. And in the Mahayana Sutras, you get this really dramatized, like in the story of Dhammakara, where he goes off and really thinks about the Pure Land, and he's going to do this and he's going to do that, and he kind of makes these vows, and this aspiration bursts out of him of like, yes, I am going to, the bodhicitta arises within him. And then the Buddha Lokeshvaraja, who is his teacher, predicts him to full and perfect enlightenment. And quite often then they get given the very poetic and flowery name that they're going to have as a Buddha. Not that Amitabha is particularly flowery, but quite often in these Mahayana sutras they are flowery. Yes. Okay. And so then we've got the Yogacara school. So they talk about the turning around in the deepest seat of consciousness, where all the dark Buddha all the dark seeds get expelled from our psyche, and the Buddha seeds arise and grow. Now, so Bhante, when he was exploring the Buddhist tradition and sort of trying to make sense of all these different strands arising in different places at different times. He goes through very beautifully how, in his perspective, they all pretty much equate. It's like there are different aspects of something of a transcendental nature erupting in a particular psychophysical continuum. That's his words describing stream entry in the three jewels. And he's saying, well, there are different flavours. The arising of the bodhicitta, that's got more of an altruistic flavour. Entering the stream, that's more like the individual liberation flavour. And his addition to these is the levels of going for refuge, which we're probably all quite familiar with from provisional going for refuge, when we first get attracted to the Dharma and we have a sort of, we're going to give this a go, but we're not quite sure, to effective going for refuge at ordination, and to real going for refuge when something of a transcendental nature arises in us. And Bhante would equate that to probably how the Buddha talks about it in terms of breaking the three fetters. And then in the 7 papers, we've got it very clearly explicated in terms of the 5 niyamas as well. So Subhuti describes this real going for refuge as the point at which non-egoistic volitions of Dharma niyama begin to unfold spontaneously. So you can see all these different traditions have a point of irreversibility. And the other thing that is common to all these descriptions is that there is an other power aspect, or at any rate, it's not a conscious choice of the individual. No practitioner, no matter how dedicated, can just sit down and kind of go, oh, I'm going to break the 3 fetters today. It doesn't work like that. It's like there's something spontaneous where conditions come together and something happens that is outside of the volitional willing of that person. Okay? So the image that I get is it's like lighting a bonfire. Okay? Hopefully we have all tried to do that at some point. So you've got this kind of like big pile of like sticks and logs and twigs and leaves and whatever it is we're trying to have a bonfire out of. And to start off with, well, maybe it's a bit of a damp day and we've got some newspaper and we've got some matches and it's a bit windy and we're trying to light the newspaper and stick it under the sticks and it keeps going out and then we light it again and then we get a bit of firelighter and you know, there's a whole sort of anxious part at the start of lighting a fire where, you know, you're blowing and you're kind of, or you're trying to shield it, or you're, you know, you're doing things to the fire in a very kind of active, busy way. And that is really necessary because otherwise the fire will not light. You'll just have a wet, cold Guy Fawkes day and there will be no bonfire. But then at a certain point, it's like the fire gets its own momentum. It gets going, the sticks start crackling, the flames start roaring upwards and catching more and more of the branches. And it's like conditions have been set in motion that mean that now that whole massive pile of the bonfire will flame and, you know, and we've got this roaring inferno and all we need to do is step back. That's the image I get. And at that point, we don't need to make effort to make that fire burn anymore. We don't need the matches anymore. Now we might need to, it's like the sort of steering of the boat. We probably need to poke it every now and again and kind of, you know, put another log on or, you know, put a bit that's on the side on the top of it. So it's not like we don't need to do things, but actually there is something that has its own momentum that we are steering. Now, Parami says that she went to talk to Banti one day about stream entry, about this thing that, like, when you get to stream, you can hear it said, oh, when you get to stream entry, you don't need to make any more effort. And apparently what Banti said was, well, it's not quite like that. It's more like at the point of stream entry, there's no longer any doubt that you're going to make that effort. It's like all of you just wants to do that. Like, actually, why would we not want to get enlightened? We'd be nuts not to want to get enlightened. It's like the parts of you that don't want to do it, that are kind of like trying to grab the branches on the side of the river and go, no, I don't want to go. They kind of calm down and they just go, oh no, actually it's going to be all right. The weight of our being is going in the direction of enlightenment. We are going to make those choices that mean we continue practicing. So you can see that although in the Buddhist tradition, where outside of Shinran, where this point of irreversibility arises, there is this aspect of something other, like a momentum other arising. I mean, just don't forget that point where we were talking about, we're putting lines in here. We're saying there's a difference between self and other. Actually, from the point of view of reality, there isn't, okay? So it's like, where are we putting the line in? Anyhow, but as we think about stream entry or irreversibility, we sort of can't help but thinking that it is a quality of ours, like it's something we've done or something we've seen, or, you know, I've broken the fetters. Well, actually, that is a statement. You know, it's not that you can't make that statement. You know, the Buddha can say, I am an enlightened being, and that makes some sort of sense. And there is another sense in which that makes no sense at all. In a way, if you say, I have broken the first 3 fetters, that statement does not make sense in the way that we would understand it. So, with our usual habitual minds, we see stream entry as my attainment, belonging to me, a quality of my being. That's just a mistake. That is just a complete mistake. It can't, it's like there are enlightening processes in the universe, and as we become part of those, we realize that I can never get enlightened. So Shinran just takes the whole concept and says, well, it makes no sense like that. Actually, irreversibility, that is never our quality. It's nothing to do with us in a way. It is a quality of Amida. So Amida has granted us, he's guaranteed us enlightenment and birth in the Pure Land. He's saying, well, you've just entered this stream of my merits, which is going to take you inexorably to the Pure Land. That's what's happening. That's what's happening. And all you have to do is trust the primal vow of Amida. So it sounds a bit bonkers. It sounds like this sort of trying to fly by pulling your own shoelaces. But actually, it's no more bonkers than thinking that breaking the 3 fetters is a quality of ours that we have done. So it might also link back to Nijivata, this sense that we are not the source of our own power and our own life energy. As spiritual practitioners, it's like we're a nexus of conditions. We're brought into being by a whole web of conditionality. And conditionality includes the 5 niyamas, it includes the Dharma niyama, and so it includes conditionality that just wants us to give it space to unfold. Actually, if we allow Dharma niyama process to unfold, it will take us to enlightenment. Like, we don't have to sort of poke it and prod it and kind of try and make it do it. It's like what we're trying to do is relax back the calculating mind, or like notice the calculating mind, stop buying into it. And then Dharma niyama processes will just naturally be arising. The unfolding wants to happen. It's more that like we block it. Okay, so coming back to Shinran and this idea that we could just completely trust that we were irreversible for enlightenment. Now, the thing is, I think the big difference between how Shinran talks about it and the rest of the tradition is that when we think of it as like a quality of a particular practitioner, it means that like there are other practitioners who aren't going to, they haven't broken the fetters, and and this is a perfectly valid way of looking at things. But Shinran is just saying, oh no, anyone who entrusts to the primal vow, they are irreversibly bound for enlightenment. Okay, so he's relying on the Pure Land Sutras for this. Again, we had a look at the vow in the longer Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, and actually after the vows, it also says, if a single mental state of determination and serene faith arises in the living beings who hear the name of the Blessed One, Amitabha, their progress towards unsurpassed perfect awakening will become irreversible. So how would it be if, in a way, like we just didn't worry about whether or not we'd broken the three fetters and we were a stream entrant? Actually, we just assumed that we were. Because actually, Bhante talks in many places how it's like a level of transcendental insight can arise before stream entry. It's like this question of like how much insight or how much faith or how much direct experiencing of a Buddha do we need for it to be stream entry? We're never going to know. It's not like a computer game where it's like you're on one level and then you kind of, you manage to jump over all the things and kind of shoot the baddies, and then it kind of goes da 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 da, and it plays you a little tune and says you're on to the next level. Woo! It's not going to be like that. It's like we're never going to have a little sign popping up saying, and you have become a stream entrant, well done. It's just not like that. We're never going to know. So the question is, well, how would it be if we just thought there is a golden thread that connects me to the Dharma? In this life, it has emerged, and it has emerged strongly enough that we have wanted to become ordained, and we have taken our spiritual practice to the heart of our lives. What if we just trusted that golden thread will take us all the way? How would that feel? And in a way, we don't have to worry about whether or not it's true. It's more like, what would be the effects on our minds and on our practice if we related to our connection with the Dharma or with a Buddha or Bodhisattva figure in that way? How would that be? When you get ordained, you could just regard that when you have that private ordination and you take a yidam, well, that's unbreakable. That's a samaya that will take you through lifetimes. You could just trust that. You could completely trust that. There's a rather old-fashioned, it might be late 19th century children's book called, I can't quite remember, it might be called Curdie and the Goblins or something like that, by George MacDonald. I don't know if anyone, anyway, I did a lot of old-fashioned reading as a child, but it's a really lovely couple of books about a miner's son and a princess. And in the mines, there are all these goblins, and there's all sorts of stories going on about what the goblins are doing and all the rest of it. But the point is that the princess, who's a young girl, has a kind of archetypal grandmother or godmother figure. And she can only ever sort of find her way to this godmother who lives right at the top of a tower. And every time she goes there, it's moonlight, and there's moonlight streaming in through the window. And she can get there when her grandmother gives her this thread. I think it's silver, actually, like a sort of moonlight thread. Oh, good. Yeah, Claire's nodding. I know she knows these books. And whenever the princess ends up in like dramatic situations, lost in the mines with goblins on all sides, suddenly she realizes, oh, where is my godmother or my grandmother's silver thread? And she can't quite see it, but if she puts her finger out, she can feel it. And then the thread, she follows the thread, and it takes her where she needs to go next. And sometimes it takes her into the next part of the adventure, and sometimes it takes her back up to her godmother's high chamber in the tower. And actually, we could rely on our faith sense to be that thread of moonlight. We could totally trust that. And like the princess, like maybe at some points in our life we can't see it, maybe it's not visible, but actually there will always be something where we can reach out our finger and we can just touch that thread, and it will take us where we need to go next. And we can totally trust it. So the obvious dangers to this are complacency, like we just sort of lie back on a beach, lie low, we're on a package holiday in Spain and we just go, la, I don't need to practice, la, 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 la. I think that would be the danger of sort of like slumping into just sort of thinking, oh, it'll be all right. But actually, I think if we're really in touch with that thread, well, it includes existential urgency, and it includes our longing for our heart to fulfill its potential. And, it includes this sense of knowing that just staying small, staying safe, trying to make ourselves cozy in this world is never going to do it. It's never going to satisfy us, and it's never going to meet the inevitable suffering that we encounter both personally and that we see around us in the world. When we're in touch with that golden thread of faith, it's almost like we know we don't have a choice. It's like when we're in touch with that, we know that practice is the only direction. And just to say, this is when Shinran's saying, just trust this, just trust that you're going to be bound for enlightenment. True entrusting is spiritual death, okay? So it's like when you, because we're going to do a meditation after this where we just try out entrusting, like just entrusting that we are going to become enlightened, and that's just how it is. That's just what's going to happen. And it's like there can be a real kind of ease and release and relaxing and, seeing our little mind doing its thing and just going, oh, what a shame, but not buying into it. It can really feel like we're in the current of something, and it can be gorgeous. And it can also produce a really strong sense of existential fear, okay? So to truly entrust that we are going to get enlightened, actually we're like Wien in that first bit of the Tannis show, where he's saying, I'm not sure I want to go to the Pure Land. Is it? I'm not sure I think it's a good idea. It's why I love the Tannis show. It so says it how it is. And Shinran says, I could read it instead of trying to remember it, couldn't I? Yeah. Impossible it seems to leave this old house of agitation where we have wandered aimlessly since the beginning of time. Actually, like letting go of little me, this knot tied up in a piece of string, that will evoke visceral fear. So if you find all sorts of resistance coming up in you, including all sorts of intellectual reasons why you cannot possibly accept that you might be irreversible for enlightenment, actually bear in mind that it may be your afraid sense of self going, oh, I need to get rid of that because it's way too threatening to think that that's what's going to happen. So, yeah. Okay, so living the Nembutsu. I know I keep saying this, but this is spiritual death practice, and this is why I wanted everybody on this retreat to be an experienced practitioner. So how do we take this into our everyday lives? Well, actually, I can't help thinking that no other practice approach is so amenable to be being taken into our everyday lives. So in a way, what I'm doing is sort of restating what we've been looking at through the whole week, where the practice is being in relation. That is the practice. We're being in relation to ourselves as finite, limited being, and we're being in relation to other, Buddha, awakening process, faith. Now, the most easy pitfall to fall in with self-surrender practice is thinking that what we are trying to do is manufacture big devotional experiences. Okay, that isn't what we're trying to do. So, you know, if we go on retreat or, you know, something happens and it's just like, and a big devotional experience happens, well, marvellous, that's great. We know what to do with it, don't we? We've got a framework for what would be going on. But that isn't what we're trying to do day to day. We are trying to live the Nembutsu. So Nem, remember, meaning heart, mind, now. And Butsu, meaning Buddha. So you know how the secular mindfulness people have like 3-minute breathing spaces that you bring in at points during the day. Well, actually, we could have a 3-minute Nembutsu space. Why not? Where am I going? Okay, right. So the being in relation to us, it's this whole area where we can never be in such a rubbish state that we don't go, oh, look, I'm in a really rubbish state. I'm totally tangled up in anxiety. And we just go, oh yeah, this is what's happening now. This is me as a karmic, conditioned, limited being, getting all tied up in whatever mental states happen to be going on. Or this is me just having yelled at my partner or my child, or, you know, or this is me and I'm having a marvellous morning. You know, we're just coming into relation. But what we are doing is we're bringing this wisdom perspective on the selfing mind. And we might do this by learning a couple of lines of the Tanisho. I mean, I do a lot of reciting the Tanisho, actually, because it helps give us a bigger perspective. So we might say to ourselves, oh, I'm all tangled up. When we think good thoughts, we think we are good. And when we think evil thoughts, we think we are evil. Not realising that it is not these thoughts, but the inconceivable power of the vow that makes our salvation possible. I mean, you have to find something that works for you. Shinran's words may work for you, or you might need to rephrase it in words that, you know, make sense in your language. But we're bringing a perspective that it's like, oh, whatever's happening, yep, it's all right. This is us as a conditioned being. And just offering ourselves empathy for any suffering that might be going on in that. Okay. I'm a bombu. Oh, yes, you could start singing, remember you're a bombu. There we go. That's what you could have. To the tune of the Wombles. Anything like that. But it's like meeting ourselves with a wisdom perspective on small self, with kindness, with forgiveness. Okay. Oh, I am going to tell you this. Okay, so it's like I read all this in Shinran and then I discover it's all in the 7 papers as well, which was highly exciting. So this is from Reimagining the Buddha. And this is linking into we're not trying to create big experiences, okay? Sometimes we're in relation to us and we're also in relation to the Buddha. I better say this bit first, actually. So we might be chanting a mantra. We might have a physical object, like sometimes I have a vajra in my pocket or just a stone in my pocket. It could be a broken thing in your pocket. You might have a micro puja you recite, a verse you really love that you recite. You might have an image you bring to mind, or you might just get in touch with a sense of longing. You might just get in touch with a sense of longing. And sometimes what you might be in touch with is not the Buddha, because actually in our everyday lives, quite often we're not particularly in touch with the Buddha. You know, that's just true. I'm not anyway, maybe you are, but I'm certainly not. And I don't think Shinran would have been either, but he would just say, and that's not a problem. So it's this thing where actually we can relate as strongly to the Buddha by the Buddha's absence as by his presence. Because, you know, it's that thing in the poem last night about if we feel absence, actually that is the connection between us. You know, when there's someone we love and we're not able to see them, as has happened for a lot of us in the pandemic, actually our longing to see them, our awareness of their absence, that is our connection with that person. And then we've got Bhante saying it. Sangharachta has commented, this is Subhuti, that the image of the Buddha may at times be experienced, as it were, by its absence. One may be vividly aware of one's own unenlightenment, one's distance from the Buddha, rather than the Buddha's own presence. One may feel quite happy and confident in an ordinary human sense, and yet feel intensely that one is trapped by one's fundamental ignorance of the nature of things in a vicious circle of self-attachment. Indeed, this recognition is necessary for a full realization of the Buddha's image. It is only to the extent that one knows one is not the Buddha that one can know the Buddha. Shadows reveal the light of the sun. So this is what we're doing with living the Nembutsu. Again and again through our day, we're just turning towards us as finite conditioned beings and the Buddha as limitless, measureless, an ocean of virtues, compassions, and wisdom. And we are just trusting. We don't have to manufacture enlightenment. We don't have to worry about the fetters. All we have to do is live that relationship, finite to infinite. Just living that relationship. That is the alchemy of what Shinran is describing. That is Jinen, made to become so by itself. And if we live that with vividness, we can just trust. Enlightenment, awakening is just going to be manifesting for us. And actually, we don't have to worry about when or how or anything of that sort. It's like all we do, we live that relation. That is it. There is nothing else. Okay, so I think that is definitely time for a tea break.